That was Jennifer Gould-Kyle from the New York Post. She's really great. I really recommend reading her column, Gimme Shelter, in the New York Post. And you are listening to Stribling's New York on WOR Radio 710 on your digital dial. If you want to learn more about Stribling and Associates, you should contact Tony Simone. He is a Renaissance man. He works at Stribling. He is also the producer of this show. tsimone@stribling.com. TSIMONE at Stribling, STRIBLING.com. Or go to his blog, which is fascinating, TonySimone.com, TONYSIMONE.com. So, we have an interesting guest. Daniel, I'm going to botch your name again. Visé?
You got it.
Okay. Well, Daniel is an author and journalist, a graduate of Wesleyan and Northwestern University, and he's already, I can tell, much smarter than I am. He's worked at the Washington Post, the Miami Herald, 3 other newspapers in a 23-year career. He shared a 2001 Pulitzer Prize and has garnered more than 24 other national and regional journalism awards. And he is here to talk to us about his new book. Welcome.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
So tell us about the book and the title and what it's about. I'm not going to intro it.
No, it's called Andy and Don. It's from Simon and Schuster. It came out in November. It's now in its 6th printing. It's done well, particularly down south, but also up north. I was at the 92nd Street Y on the 29th of February. I'm doing a book festival this weekend. I did one last weekend. It's been great. The book is a dual biography that charts the course of the friendship, the historic friendship between Andy Griffith and Don Knotts. And because you all are in New York, you need to know that the friendship began in New York. They were buddies. They met on the set of No Time for Sergeants, which was a huge play around 1955. And that was the beginning, and that's kind of the beginning of my story.
Was that an Ira Levin play?
I think it was. That name does sound familiar.
My father and uncle were both World War II veterans, and they loved that show, and they loved the movie.
It was a trifecta. It was a book, it was a movie, it was a play, it was a hit in all 3 forms. It was a big deal in the mid-'50s, and Don Knotts sort of begged his way into the cast. He wasn't a name at all. In fact, the only thing Don had done up to that point really was he'd been on WOR. He was a radio guy. He voiced a character on a kiddie show on the radio in the first half of the 50s, and that was pretty much his big credit up to that point.
Well, Don Knotts had an incredible career. I, unfortunately, didn't get a chance to do any deep research on you or your book. This was just tossed to me, but I wanted to get you on the show. But I grew up watching the Andy Griffith Show, and Don, of course, was huge in these cartoony kind of movies, The Incredible Mr. Limpet, where he played a guy who got turned into a fish. And
right.
He was also an astronaut, and they were big. And I remember going to Radio City Music Hall and seeing those movies with my parents. If that ages me.
Yeah, no, it was. He had a bunch of little 4 or 5 year snippets in his career. One of them was that one, the Universal films. He was a pretty big star. He did 5 years of Disney films after the Andy Griffith Show. He did 5 years, more or less, on Three's Company as Mr. Furley, which was something I watched when it was on the air, around 1980. And Andy, too, had a bunch of different identities. He was the star of this wonderful film called A Face in the Crowd.
I was just going to mention that. Lonesome Rhodes is who he played.
A scary, scary character. And the movies come up in the popular press recently with these comparisons. I don't know if they're good comparisons or not, but with Donald Trump and his campaign, I'm not sure how much of a parallel there is. But the film is a masterpiece. It was made by Elia Kazan, and it was, Andy was so very proud of it. It was a great work of his.
Well, Andy also started as a comedian, really.
That's right. He came to New York, I think, at the beginning of 1954, and this was on the strength of a hit 45 comedy record called What It Was Football, which was a send-up of kind of the bumpkin Southern hick guy, and it sold like 1 million copies. He came up to New York. He bombed. New York is a tough town, right? He bombed, so he had to retreat back south and do all these nightclub stints for about 1.5 years, and then he came back, and then he got that role in not the Face in the Crowd. He got the role on the No Time for Sergeants, and that was the beginning of his real career.
In New York, everything was tough back then with television. It was a little inside thing. There's a great book about William Paley called In All His Glory, and CBS was known as the Tiffany Network, but it was jokingly called CBS Country Broadcasting System because they had the Beverly Hillbillies and shows like that on there. And they're just suddenly in the 60s, like Andy Griffith and Jim Nabors were these goofy guys who then did sound like Jim Nabors sang really well, even though he sounded at first like he was an idiot. And Andy Griffith parlayed that into something. But you're right, he had multiple careers because then he did Matlock.
Matlock was his big comeback. It actually lasted longer than the Griffith Show. It was on the air for 9 years, and that occasioned a reunion between my two characters, Andy and Don. They did a bunch of episodes of that show together.
How many Emmys did Don win?
He won 5, and at the time, he was the first person to win 5 Emmys for the same character on the same show. There's other people since then, I think, who may have equaled that number, but it was a big, big deal. Andy was I would say a little envious of it. In fact, there was a little bit of a rivalry between them. Andy got all the financial reward for the program, but no artistic reward, and he deserved it. He was great. Don got all the artistic recognition, but not nearly as much money as Andy
that
got.
was a big thing back then. I know that Buddy Ebsen and Irene Ryan were at one point for the Beverly Hillbillies when they had 50 million viewers, were making $1,500 an episode at the beginning. I don't know if Don got killed that badly. I hope not.
He didn't. He topped out at $100,000 a year, which in 1965 was a lot of money.
It was,
but it's nothing like $1 million an episode that people get sometimes now.
Ron Howard tells a great story about the show. He said, I think he told this story with Michael Kay, that he was a huge Dodger fan when he was a kid, and when Koufax and Drysdale held out for $110,000 and $100,000 respectively, Ron was furious, and he was going, how could these guys want to make so much money? And then somebody said, well, you make more than both of them. And he was like, what? But I'm 10 years old.
I saw that story. Don was a huge Dodger fan as well, and he just was glued to the radio or the television every time they were on the air.
Yeah, it is amazing financially that, while, yes, that was a nice salary, it's the same thing with baseball players. It's not like Don was going to be set for life making that $100K, and it is remarkable that he went on to win all those Emmys, but he had a great career.
He made a lot more money in the 70s. He had a short-lived variety show, and it's just the circumstances. He got like $3 or $4 million to do this variety show, which bombed, but he got the money, and then he got paid, I think, quite well to be on the Three's Company, and so those were his 2 big paychecks, I think. And
I imagine there were some residuals for the Andy Griffith Show, which then became Andy of Mayberry. Was Don still on the show then or not?
He was on the black and white episodes in the first 5 seasons. If you think about it, because it sounds like you've watched a lot of the show, and I sure did too. He's gone when it goes color. And I've talked to a lot of diehard fans the last few months, and very few of them like those color episodes. That's kind of a dirty little secret within the Mayberry diaspora. Is that
I'm glad my parents aren't alive to hear this, because they were always furious at me watching too much TV. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Daniel. This was really fun and a waltz back down memory lane for me. So good luck with the book. I hope it keeps selling. I'm going to take a look at it now.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, thanks.